Yeah, I hate this stupid keyframe graph. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. More than WASPs, more than Chris Chan, more than the current GPU market. Alright, it's some of the worst UX design I've ever seen, and the day it dies is the day I can die happy. Other than that, neat program. Glad I learned it. I made a video 1 year ago where I tried and failed to switch to DaVinci Resolve to edit these videos. For reasons that'll soon be very obvious, I don't really stand by it anymore. At that point in my life, I had been using a now defunct video editor called HitFilm Pro for almost 2 years, after having used Adobe products for even more years prior. And with the writing being on the wall for HitFilm, I had decided to find a new video editor to potentially switch to, eventually landing on DaVinci Resolve because everyone from filmmakers, YouTubers, and Linux users kept singing its praises and saying it's the best, if not only viable option nowadays. But after a month of trying to learn Resolve specifically for that video, I determined that it wasn't right for me, due to the way it was laid out and how it handled keyframes, among other things. But I also recognized that I was still new to the program and that with time I could get used to it, so I decided to just stick with HitFilm for main channel uploads, but still try and learn Resolve in the background, just in case something happened to HitFilm. And, well, it's been a year since then already, or only, take your pick, and something happened to HitFilm. So at that point I decided it would be in my best interest to rip the band-aid off and make the switch. And now I can safely say that I've succeeded in switching to DaVinci Resolve. I'm more than happy with the program and what it enables me to make for you guys, to the point where I now agree with the hype and believe that, assuming you can run it, it's the best video editor on the market, especially considering that it's free. But I still have my issues with it, most of which I've gotten used to and have overcome, but some that I still think could be improved on, or maybe I don't know how to deal with yet, which I guess is what this video will aim to do. Highlight where I am in my DaVinci Resolve journey after a year, and give my thoughts as someone who now uses it as his main video editing program, in an attempt to encourage some discussions that we all can learn from. I highly recommend you watch the first video if you haven't already, just for context, as this video is more for those who at least know a little bit about what I'm talking about. Also, and this is future me here, note that I used version 18.6 for that video, and I've been using 18.6 this whole time. I will touch upon version 20 later on as it's quite relevant, but I want to focus on my experience with 18.6 first before I get there. So bear with me, and understand most of this was written before the release of 20. Probably my largest overarching problem with Resolve and the way it was fundamentally laid out was how it seemed to be several separate programs loosely bound together, rather than the one mostly cohesive workflow that HitFilm was. And because of how different the parts functioned at first, I felt as though Resolve lent itself more to professional teams with specialized roles, rather than pseudo-professional individuals like myself who just wanted to make YouTube videos. But now that I spent some time actually learning the basics of each page and how they fit together, I no longer stand by that criticism. I now think that these parts are actually integrated with each other quite well and are actually much more useful to generalists than I give it credit for. Each page has enough basic functionality to them so that they can be mere extensions to the core editing experience, if that's all you want from them. And if you want more than that, they lend themselves very well to experimentation, with all of them having layers of complexity that you can just dive into. Before long, you'll find that there's an order of operations to these pages, or a hierarchy of sorts, with the edit tab being the primary program and the other pages being secondary to it. You take clips from the timeline on the edit page, you make them fancier in Fusion, and then make additional adjustments to the fancified clip using color, while keeping the audio in check using Fairlight. These aren't just different UI layouts like in Blender or entirely different programs like the Creative Cloud. These are like tools in a toolbox designed specifically to fit the need of any level of mechanic or engineer, and it's grown on me quite a bit. The Fusion page in particular is the best example of this. The insane amount of extra effects and functionality hidden within Fusion make it a hidden layer of Resolve in and of itself. And that's before you get into things like 3D, merging, masking, template creation, and even expressions, which basically lets you write little equations to link properties together. You can essentially make your own effects in Fusion and then reuse them on the Edit tab, complete with custom inputs and controls. The process of actually saving Fusion effects is a bit awkward, but the fact that it's possible is quite nice. Fusion is awesome. It's also a pain in the ass. It is not efficient at all, no matter what way you look at it. Node-based workflows in general tend to suffer when it comes to efficiency and beginner friendliness, and Fusion is no different. For more complicated scenes, it can definitely come in clutch, but if you're just using a few effects or trying to key out or mask parts of your footage, or even just trying to transform your footage in a way that'll actually work, it seems to take longer to do than it should. And especially in instances where compositing and trimming is involved, I often find myself wishing I just had layers to work with instead of nodes. Don't get me wrong, multi-merge is an incredibly welcome and useful node, but it's nowhere near as intuitive as just using a timeline. Not to mention that you can't seem to change the duration of Fusion clips after you make them, or the fact that audio from the timeline or from media doesn't always seem to transfer into Fusion, and when it does, it might glitch out at some point and become unreliable. Or if you create a Fusion clip from clips in the edit timeline and save it to the media pool, it only saves the initial unedited version, and any changes you make in Fusion don't seem to transfer over to the version saved in the media pool. And when you go to render the Fusion clip in place, all the nodes disappear and you can't edit to begin with, meaning that if you make a mistake somewhere and only catch it after pre-rendering because the performance is so shit that you can't really see what's going on, and you have to start over because you forgot to hit undo before closing the program because it's late and you need to go to bed? Okay, so apparently there's a fix for this. After rendering something in place, you can right-click and select Decompose to Original, and that brings back the nodes. Point moot. There are all sorts of tiny things that kind of bring down Fusion and make it not integrate as well with the rest of the program as I'd like, which I can always get over and I largely have, but what I can't get over is just how lackluster the performance is. I've hopped on about this for a good chunk of the original video, but I can't stress enough how unusable Resolve and Fusion especially can get after a while. If you're trying to run it on a crappy old laptop like I am, then it won't take long before whatever clip you're working on will suddenly no longer play in the viewport, and you'll have to render it in place to see what you're doing. Especially if you're doing anything with 3D, alright? Not only is it an ordeal to set up, but if you don't turn on hardware encoding on a render node, it runs so slow that it's just not worth using it. Even with hardware encoding, it's still a stuttering mess, to the point where I've been learning a little more about Blender on top of DaVinci Resolve just to incorporate 3D, because it's much faster and more stable. DaVinci Resolve is easily the hardest program to run I've ever used, and it really makes doing anything in it beyond basic tasks take much longer than it normally would. And although I've found ways to mitigate these problems, like rendering in place or timeline proxy resolution, or even sometimes disabling play every frame, which is similar to the frame dropping mode in Blender, it only does so much. In fact, with timeline proxies, which is usually the most helpful performance feature, rendering anything in place with the proxy set to half or quarter will result in the stupid thing rendering the proxies instead of the actual footage, which results in the pre-render being all blurry and garbage looking, which further adds yet another landmine in the process of rendering Fusion clips in place that I have to worry about. It's all a struggle I'm really starting to get sick of now, and I know it's probably on me for trying to run Resolve on the same crappy old Dell laptop I've been using since 2018, but like, okay, how do I put this? I have actually managed to build a new, fully functioning desktop earlier this year that should have more than enough power to run Resolve, but I can't use it right now because, for reasons I'd rather not get into for the sake of this video's length, it doesn't have a graphics card in it yet, which is kind of important for Resolve. Hopefully when I do get a graphics card, all my performance issues will fall by the wayside, and by extension like 90% of the problems I have with the program will go away. And all that's left are these little nitpicks that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Things like the lack of WebP support, or the exorbitant size of the cache folders, or the fact that it likes to crash from time to time and only after you forget to save after a while, something that every single program does full stop. Then there's the fact the interface is only half customizable and doesn't let you pop out panels like HitFilm or Premiere Pro did, which I did find annoying at first, but after having gotten used to it and the way DaVinci Resolve does things, I don't mind it as much. Then there's Resolve's garbage H.264 codec, which makes it so that exporting MP4 files directly from the program results in bitrate glitches and artifacts. And to deal with that, I ended up downloading Handbrake, which is a free open source media encoder so that I could take lossless video files rendered from Resolve and re-encode them using a much better H.264 codec. It does negate the time saved from Resolve's generally quicker render times, and I'm stuck with this massive file that takes up half the space on my puny SSD, but again, no computer should make this trivial. Then there's this really weird problem with video footage not being pixel perfect, particularly screen recordings. It's most noticeable if you zoom into small text on a solid background, where you'll notice this sort of ghosting around the edges of pixels, almost like some kind of sharpening filter. And as I come to find out after hours upon hours of digging through old forums, that's kinda exactly what's going on. The project-wide resize filter, which I guess determines how footage looks when zoomed in, defaults to sharper, which works great in most cases except for when you want pixel perfect imagery, which is where the linear or even nearest neighbor filters would work better. Just about every issue I've had with this program, even new ones I've discovered along the way, I've managed to find a solution for it, or some kind of workaround, or have at least gotten used to, or have a path towards finding a solution. Except for one problem, probably the biggest problem with Resolve, that being its keyframe functionality. I touched upon it in my first video, how all the different pages of Resolve handle keyframes completely differently from each other, and how outside of Fusion, none of them do keyframes particularly well. The edit page in particular, for essentially being the main page of the program, I think fumbles keyframes the hardest. Basically, you create keyframes in the inspector, which is easy enough, I guess, but then you decide you want to move to keyframes you created. You can't do that in the inspector, that would make too much sense. Instead, you have to go to the clip itself in the timeline and click on this diamond here, and that opens up a keyframe drop-down timeline thing where you can move them. And even then, you can only move keyframes for certain properties and not for effects. In order to move keyframes for effects, you have to open up the accursed keyframe graph on the clip. This annoying little space where you have to zoom out just to get to the drop-down, where you can search for the property you want to adjust and do it there. And there's no shortcut I know of to lock the keyframes on the x-axis like in Fusion. You have to do it by hand and will likely have to re-enter the value you need at the new position. And when it comes to easing keyframes, you can do it, but it's so cumbersome to do so that you may as well just make a Fusion clip of the footage and do it there. Because again, on the edit page, there's no shortcut to lock axes like there is in the Fusion page. And position keyframes in particular are kind of broken, as when you select the keyframes and enable easing on them, either in the inspector or in the graph, it only turns on the Bezier curves in a graph, but it doesn't actually flatten them like it does literally every other easable property. And again, unlike the Fusion page, there's no shortcut to flatten them yourself. You gotta eyeball it in this ridiculously small and cramped space, often with dark colors that blend in with the background, again with no ability to lock axes or even flatten. And that's even if you can ease the keyframes at all. It's a mess. Like Fusion has a perfect example of a keyframe graph that lets you do all these things. Why not just bring it over here? Why do I have to switch to the Fusion tab to do everything there? Literally the only area this graph is any good in is the read time curve. I actually like the read time curve. It gets the job done, it's easy to use, you don't have to be so particular with the mouse. It's fine. But besides that, this graph can go to hell. I hate it. And the day Blackmagic updates DaVinci Resolve with a proper keyframe editor will be the greatest day of my life. Okay, future me again. Yeah, they updated DaVinci Resolve this past month, and it has a new keyframe editor. And it was indeed the greatest day of my life. This is version 20.0, so it's quite the landmark to begin with. There are a lot of new AI tools because, that's just the direction everything is going in, and I'm on the free version anyway, so I couldn't even use any of them if I wanted to. But besides that, there are some other things there that are legitimately cool. Text Plus has become more useful, multi-text is a thing, you can open creative timelines in the source viewer, the color page has all sorts of new goodies, Fairlight has some better automation, and you can create effect chains to reuse later. You can import Photoshop files into Fusion and have all the layers accessible to you. There's a new voiceover recording thing that I'm not going to use because I have Audacity. And of course, the new keyframe editor. You can pop it out. That alone makes this the best thing ever, okay? The fact that you can just have it out on the side or even on a separate monitor is something I honest to God didn't think they could pull off. But they did, and I love it. And functionally, the graph is already much better than before. You can move, remove, and use any and all keyframes, including those for effects. You can hold shift to lock axes when moving keyframes, same while easing them. The playhead snaps to keyframes, zooming looks great, and you can even copy-paste keyframes between clips. It's absolutely vastly superior to what we had before, and I can confidently say that I don't really like it in its current form. because it's kind of unfinished and unpolished, and I don't think it was ready for prime time. Let me explain. The keyframe panel has two, sections to it, parameter and graph, and in the parameter section you can hide and unhide parameters to declutter, which is nice, but for whatever reason you can only show parameters on the graph that aren't hidden in the parameters section. Meaning if you want to adjust effect keyframes on a graph, you have to actively show them on the parameters section, then show them on the graph section, and only then can you adjust them. Thankfully, there is an option in the parameters section to automatically hide and show parameters that have keyframes, and you can just press this curved bottom to the sides of them to hide and show them in a graph, so there is an acceptable workflow here that I can get used to, but it's still just not very intuitive. Like, I had to figure this out for myself and set it up that way. And you can't really set keyframes in this editor either. There's no space where you can just type in the values for parameters, and you still have to rely on the inspector for that. And the thing opens on the left instead of the right where the inspector is, so it has to compete with both the effect and media panels, both of which I like to have up at the same time. And while popping it out solves this problem, whenever you switch to a different page of the program, the panel unpops out, and when you return, you have to re-pop it out and bring back the effects panel. Every single time. And God forbid one of your monitors is smaller than the other and you have a larger DPI on the smaller one so you can see things on it better, or else when you pop out the keyframe editor and try to move it over to that monitor, the panel makes like the big bang and expands super fast and crashes the whole program. And I had to set Resolve's UI display scale setting to 100% instead of auto so it wouldn't freak out like that. And unfortunately, easing is still kind of a bitch too. The default ease, if you enable easing in a graph, is too extreme, and I find myself having to dial it back every time. And while easing from the inspector panel gets the kind of easing from before, position keyframes still don't flatten automatically, and there's still no shortcut to flatten them, which means you still have to do them by hand. Which isn't really ideal, as while you can select and move multiple keyframes at once, you can't ease multiple keyframes at once. You have to ease each one individually, making it super easy for position and scale to go out of sync and get super wonky. And while you can zoom in and get them to be super close and it'll be fine, it's still a hassle. Then there's the retime curve, the one good aspect of the original keyframe graph, and if you ask me, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I would like the old keyframe graph back as an option, but just for the retime curve. Yeah, it does work the same in the new one, and it's still easy to use, but I honestly prefer it where it was, where the other retime tools were, because it's just more intuitive. I'm happy to see some kind of dedicated keyframe timeline thing, and it's a massive step in the right direction, but it's clear that there's still some work to do on it. Alright, it's still in 3rd place, or 4th place because Blender took the top spot. I still prefer to just switch to Fusion and do things there. Like, why not just reuse the Fusion spline panel as the keyframe graph? Or at least bring over the keyboard shortcut that flattens the Bezier handles. It doesn't make sense. And the worst part is, I can't really switch to Fusion to do things anymore, as general performance has gotten significantly worse. Talking like straight up just a still image with no effects or keyframes or anything. And it doesn't run at a full frame rate, even with proxies and with timeline playback resolution, as it's now called, set to quarter. I pretty much have to keep play every frame disabled in order to be able to time things and hear the audio going. I don't know if it's because of the new NVIDIA drivers that Resolve 20 made me install, or if the program itself is just that bloated, but this program has become almost unusable on my laptop. Hence why editing this time around has been kinda bare bones. It's pretty clear at this point that if I want to keep using Resolve 20 in the capacity I want, I'd have to move on to my new PC and get a graphics card into it so that it runs properly. Which leads me into the last thing I want to bring up for this video. That being the new PC. I got a graphics card for it. And what I went with might be a little controversial. I got a 9070 XT from AMD, specifically the Sapphire Pulse, because it was on what I guess is considered a sale in today's GPU market. It's their latest mainstream mid-range card that's meant to compete with NVIDIA's 5070 Ti, which is their mid-range type card. And it's generally cheaper and easier to find, and at least in gaming performs within the range of the 5070 Ti, even beating it in some cases. But, and this is where the controversy may kick in, the one good thing about the 50 series, including the 70 Ti, is their performance specifically in DaVinci Resolve. they top the charts. And if I could easily afford it or even find it, I would probably go for the 5070 Ti for that reason, if it weren't for the driver problems and the fact that I really don't like Nvidia right now. And besides, it's not like the XT is unusable in Resolve depending on how you plan to use it. Outside of AI and perhaps GPU effects, it actually somewhat holds its own against the 5070 Ti in things like media playback and fusion. It works. And as for Blender, because I've been starting to use that too, yeah, AMD doesn't handle cycles very well, but for my videos I use the relatively unfussy Eevee render anyways. And outside of that, I don't really render things out of Blender, I just use it to model. So yeah, I got the 9070 XT, because it seems like it'll cover every aspect of my own productivity needs while remaining stable and having more than good enough gaming performance. And it's cheaper, so yeah. Once I finish up this video and finally retire my 7-year-old laptop, I'll be fine, hopefully for another 7 years. As for my journey with DaVinci Resolve, the semantics of it all, how Resolve transformed the way I approach video editing, it's just kinda like no shit to me. Of course I've transformed, my videos are longer now, my editing isn't as hyperactive as it used to be. I have a different mindset now compared to just a year ago when I still used HitFilm. I said in my first video that I could see myself getting really good at DaVinci Resolve, given the time and proper hardware. And, well, yeah, it's been a year, I finally have a new computer though I haven't used it yet, and I've gotten pretty good with DaVinci Resolve. And I can safely say I'm happy with DaVinci Resolve despite my nitpicks. I did have the advantage of 8 years of video editing experience to help me out, along with my experience in node-based workflows from game dev, but I still think that once you understand how all the parts fit into the whole starts to open up and you can just dive right in. Time is money, don't get it twisted, but if you aren't too concerned with taking your time, then Resolve being pretty much free negates all that. So if you're on the fence about switching to, or perhaps even starting with Resolve, I say go for it. This is one of those rare pieces of consumer-friendly software that I can comfortably say is worth using, and we need to treasure it at all costs.